A Face in the Dark, written by Ruskin Bond. First of all, we will know who is Ruskin Bond. Ruskin Bond, an Indian author of British descent in a prolific writer whose works are popularly with adults and children alike. In the following story, writer Ruskin Bond relates a thrilling incident set among the picturesque hills around Simla. Ruskin Bond's fascinations with the paranormal finds expressions in the remarkable tale. Paranormal, the range of normal, scientific investigations or lying outside. Mr. Oliver, a school teacher, on his way back to school late one night. When he meets a strange young boy, the encounter fills he will terror and he takes his heels, only to discover that there is no escape from him. Ruskin Bond makes skillful use of all the elements of a horror story: fear, surprise, suspense, and mysteries to explore humanity collectively fascinations with the dark. A Face in the Dark, written by Ruskin Bond. Mr. Oliver, an Anglo-Indian teacher, was returning to his school late one night on the outskirts of hill stations of Simla. From before Kipling time, the school has been running on English public school lines, and the boys, most of them from wealthy Indian families, who wore blazers, caps and ties. Life magazine, in a Features of India, has once called it Eton of the East. Mr. Oliver has been teaching in the school for several years. Here, one man is there whose name is Mr. Oliver, who is an Anglo-Indian teacher. Anglo means an foreigner but settled in India, and he was teaching in the hill stations in Simla. Kipling time means the time when British rule in India, and in English medium schools, English public school lines means English medium schools, only wealthy family students only can read there, no poor, and they mostly wear blazers. Blazers means our coat, or we can say jackets, caps and ties. Life magazine, in the Features of India, has once said Eton of the East. There was one magazine book whose name is Eton of the East. Mr. Oliver has teaching in the school for several years. He was teacher for several years in the schools. Next part. The Simla Bazaar, with its cinemas and restaurants, was about 3 miles from the school, and Mr. Oliver, a bachelor, usually strolled into the town in the evening, return after dark, when he would take a shortcut through the pine forest. The Simla Bazaar means there in Simla there was one bazaar whose name is Simla Bazaar, with their cinemas and restaurants. There was many restaurant and cinemas halls, and Mr. Oliver, who was bachelor, and that bazaar is 3 miles from the school, and Mr. Oliver is a bachelor, so he usually go to that bazaar in evening time and returning after dark up to 8 or 9 o'clock he was returning, and he taking a shortcut through the pine forest. Next part. When there was a strong wind, the pine trees make sad eerie sounds that keep most people to the main road, but Mr. Oliver was not a nervous or imaginative man. He carries a torch, and it gleamed the batteries were running down, most faithfully down the narrow forest path, when its flickering light fell in the figure of a boy who was sitting alone on a rock. Mr. Oliver stopped. Boys were not supposed to be out after dark. In that when he take a pine forest road, no peoples are going there because the pine trees make sad eerie sound. Eerie means gloomy and strange sound. and that keep the most people to the main road. But Mr. Oliver, a man who is not nervous or imaginative, he carried a torch and it gleamed. Gleamed means beam or ray of soft light. The batteries were running down. It not working properly. Move faithfully down the narrow forest, and he faithfully going through the narrow forest. When its flickering light fell in a figure of a boy, his flickering means faithfully. Flickering means brown or sin means light fell on that figure of a boy who was sitting along a rock. There was one boy who sitting along a rock, and Mr. Oliver stopped there and told that boys were not supposed to be out after dark. Next part. What are you doing out here, boy? Asked Mr. Oliver sharply, moving closer so that he could recognize the miscreant. But even he approached the boy, Mr. Oliver sensed that something was wrong. The boy appeared to be crying. His head hung down. He held his face in his hand, and his body shook convulsively. It was strange, soundless weepings, and Mr. Oliver felt decidedly uneasy. And Mr. Oliver told, what are you doing out here, boy? He is asking to the boy that what he is doing out here at this time. Asked Mr. Oliver. He told sharply and moving closer and going closer that he can listen his sound properly. But even he approached the boy. When he approached the boy started to be crying, and his head hung down. He held his face on his hand. And his body shook convulsively. Here is given spelling is wrong, but it is called convulsively. It was a strange, soundless weepings, and it is very strange. That boy crying is very strange and weeping, and Mr. Oliver felt decently uneasy. He felt uneasy, not enditial. Decently means not enditial. Next part. Well, what's the matter? He asked, his anger giving way to concern. What are you crying for? The boy would not answer or looked off. His body continues to be racked with silent sobbing. Come on, boy, you should not be out here at this hour. Tell me the trouble. Look up. The boy looked up. He took his hand from his face and looked up at his teacher. The light from Mr. Oliver's torch fell on the boy's face, if you could call it a face. See, this is very interesting part. Here, Mr. Oliver telling, well, what's the matter? His aunt asked his anger giving way. He gave his anger way and asked that why that boy is crying. The boy did not answer, and his body continued to be racked. Continued to be racked means he again crying with his silent sobbing. Silent sobbing means uneven and deceiving back, means he sobbing only. He is not crying loud, but he is only sobbing. Then Mr. Oliver told, come on, boy, you should not be out here this hour. He is telling that you should not be out at this hour. In this time you should not be out. You should be in hostel. Tell me the trouble. Looked up. He is also telling that tell your trouble and look up to me. The boy looked up. He took his hand from his face and looked up at his teacher. The boy looked up and he take out his hand from his face and looked to his teacher. The light from Mr. Oliver's torch fell on a boy's face, if you could call it a face. And the light of the Mr. Oliver, which light he was holding, fell on the boy's face, and if we call it a face only, nothing else. It has no eyes, ear, nose, or mouth. It was just a round, smooth head with a school cap on top of it, and that's where the story should end. But for Mr. Oliver, it did not end here. And in this part, we should call it only a face. It has no eyes, ears, nose, or mouth. It has nothing. It was just a round, smooth head only, with a skull cap and top of it. And that where the story should end. But Mr. Oliver did not end here.